It is that time in our program when we bring things to a close. I feel like that last session really offered a wonderful bookend on our time together. And I think that I at least feel like the fulfillment of knowing how rich that program was really makes this worthwhile in so many ways. So tremendous thanks for that. We were very grateful when Lissa and Antonio agreed to come and join us at the conference. And amongst other contributions throughout the conference, to spend time across our program, and for Lissa to spend time with the YMES program in significant ways, to get a sense of what is happening in the field, to get a sense of where the field is moving, to get a sense of how the summit itself might move in new directions that would allow us to expand our community, that would allow us to represent the world of media education in a more authentic and real way. And it's with tremendous gratitude that they agreed to take on this role. So the format is that we've asked Lissa and Antonio to each speak for about 10 to 12 minutes or so, 15 minutes, to offer reflections. And then there'll be an opportunity for us as an audience to share reflections. I think we're small enough in size that I'm tempted to, well, frankly, I'm not going to run around with a microphone because I think it'll start to become dorky and unreasonable. So let's not do that. But I do want to say that we'll have a chance for people to share reflections at the end. So please, when we do have those, there will be a chance to open up. And Antonio and Lissa have conspired on this, and Lissa has agreed to go first in her reflection. So Lissa, Soep, it's so great to have you here and to have you help them bring us to a place.
Thank you. Can you all, let's see, can you hear me? Okay. I don't know that I've ever had an assignment like this before. It was a really amazing way to, oh, thank you. It was an amazing way to go through a conference, knowing that part of what I was meant to do here is sort of take it all in, soak it in, and be able to offer some reflections, moving back and forth between these two kind of streams, you know, the research conversation, the scholarly conversation, and practice-based conversations that's been happening on the media education summit side, and then the youth media education summit that's been happening above. And, you know, I delivered sandwiches too at one point today. I think that was pretty much the only useful thing that I did. But what I got to experience was to drop in and out of a process that yielded that just really tremendous array of stories and reflections that you all shared. So it was a brilliant way to experience my first occasion of being a part of this community. And I also had to reflect and notice that it's also kind of a microcosm of my own professional career path. So I wanted to share just a little bit about where I'm coming from in this work, because it has been what has shaped my take on the frame that you all have so convincingly laid out, that is really very much indebted to Antonio's work to understand media as an ecosystem and to understand the environment as always mediated. So in my own pathway into this work and into this field, I have moved between, you know, scholarship and academia and hands-on media creation, primarily in with young people. And I started on the academic side, and just to share briefly how I ended up kind of going back and forth. I was finishing a PhD in education, and I was driving across the Bay Bridge one day from Oakland to San Francisco, for any of you who visited the Bay Area, and I heard a story on the radio. And it was unlike any story I had heard, because it was a teenager on national public radio. So, you know, reaching millions of listeners like me, telling a really powerful story about herself and her community. And I was just riveted by her narrative. And I was also so curious about this organization. What was behind, you know, this narrative that I just heard? And it turned out that it was an organization at the time called Youth Radio, now Wire Media, located in Oakland, which is a learning center and platform for youth creators working in journalism, the arts, music, to produce stories that change the world, that change their trajectories, that spark really vital conversations. And so, that really hooked me. I was offered a tenure track job and I turned it down and I said, I want to be in this space. I want to be working with young people, telling stories at the same time that I wanted to be able to be a bridge back and forth into scholarship. And of course, one of the things I quickly learned, and all of us, I think, know at this point, is that those divisions are so flimsy anyway, right? So we established a scholar in residence model within YR Media to generate knowledge with young people and our colleagues from within that youth-driven environment. We heard earlier today, and looking at those gorgeous animations, that art making, media creation is a methodology. It is a form of research, right? So left and right throughout this conference, we're seeing how the making of media is the formation of knowledge, rolls up into the investigations like the youth media creators and Sean told us about. And I think that to me has been a really important subtext of the conference, that the young folks who are here and the young people that we teach are the public intellectuals who are generating the narratives and living the experiences and having the frameworks to really tell those stories in a broader sense. And it's really saw that as a through line throughout the conference. So I wanted to then reflect on another theme that really stood out to me from the very beginning is the question of scale, and about sort of the choreography of how we get close to experiences of climate justice, climate crisis, and disaster, and how we get proximal to those experiences, and then how we find perspective on those experiences. And that sort of dance or choreography was something that I was really noticing throughout some of the talks. The image from one of the first presentations of the person hugging the hunk of ice, getting really close. And then from Mark's talk at the end, a lifting up and seeing the art piece that told the anatomy of AI, where we have to, step away and see something from a distance. And it had me thinking about imagination. And one of the theorists that I've really been indebted to in thinking about imagination, how we imagine climate crisis, how we imagine disaster and survival, and what happens next, is the philosopher Maxine Greene. And she's one of the, I think she's the first woman president of the American Education Research Association. She was devoted to this process of becoming wide awake. And we heard a lot about awakeness. What does it mean to be awake to climate crisis? Who is awake to climate crisis, right? And what awakeness meant for Maxine Greene was a capacity to imagine the world as if it were otherwise than it is. What kind of an awareness can we cultivate to make that experience possible? And so then, as I was thinking about imagination, I went to a panel earlier today that was about fabulation as a way to unlock imagination. I heard about dwelling in and getting caught in contradiction as a way to allow for imagination to sort of spiral out from those difficult conversations that we have to make space for with our young folks. But then I was also thinking about how the whole notion of being awake or woke has been sort of weaponized in our conversations. And similarly, I heard about even the notion of what it means to be critical, to do critical analysis, to exercise critical pedagogy. That's no longer a shorthand that we can take for granted in terms of what it means to be critical, what it means to do one's own research. And so I was really learning from this group how to re-examine and reconsider some of our terminology and become both more expansive and more precise about how we're using language in order to advance conversations in the direction where they need to go. So I maintain a deep belief in social imagination as a through line in our conversations and as a way forward at the intersection of critical media literacy and environmental justice. Um, and I also am thinking about visceralization as it relates to imagination, something that opened our conversation, and what it takes to feel these conditions in our bones. Uh, and and then I thought about visceralization and what purchase it gives us, what value it has, and how to think about it in the context of the emotions that we heard about from the youth presenters just now. Because sometimes I think that we talk about data visceralization as something that we need to become wide awake because our senses are dulled. We are not, paying the right kind of attention. But there's another side to it, right? Which is sometimes we're almost on the opposite extreme. We're flooded and overwhelmed. The visceralization is too intense, and we need, we need a different way to relate to the information that's coming at us, whether it's in our lived experiences or in the data that we're investigating. And again, in a moment like this, I turn to young people who I think are helping us to understand how to relate to those dynamics of getting close and finding space. I want to though share that I want to catch myself in that instinct to always come back to young people and say, the solution is there. And that's because I listened to one of the podcast episodes from Wire Media. We have a podcast called Inherited that is all about youth climate justice workers. And the very first episode of season 2, which recently launched, was an opportunity to bring on 2 guests who had been youth climate activists for some time. And one of the things that they talked about was the idea of the youth hope industrial complex. So they flipped on its head the idea. So often when we think about industrial complexes, they are not in the context of youth hope. And what this young climate activist was pointing to is this tendency that we sometimes have to extract hope from young people and to expect that somehow they, on the sheer force of their hope, they're going to topple inequalities, they're going to bring solutions. And so when I look at the work that was presented just now from the young folks who were here, I see something that is grounded in hope, but is also based in practice, based in a collegial and supported relationship between young people and other collaborators and allies, so that it's not about tokenizing youth voice and selectively citing inspirational messages, but instead it's getting proximal, it's getting on the ground, sitting side by side, doing the work together. And it also makes me think about another voice on that first episode of the Inherited podcast, Rachel Baker, who'd been a youth climate activist for some time, and she was tired. And she talked about burnout, and she talked about how she's relating to the various crises that she's stood up and taken leadership roles in with respect to racial equity, with respect to mental health destigmatization. And she came up with this framework of seasons of leadership for youth. She thinks about her relationship to her leadership needing to be seasonal. It couldn't be all the time. It needed to move in phases, just the way that the work does. So there were cadences of wide awakeness is what I came down to. And I started to think about the radical politics of rest and vulnerability, as Antonia, helped us to really identify that it can't only be about being out front and leading the charge, but also those moments of rest and vulnerability being really crucial. So just see how I'm doing on time. I never set my stopwatch. Do I have a couple more minutes? Okay. I want to say just a couple more things about, because I think I was one of the few people who got to really visit with you all during your process. So I want to just take a couple of moments to share some of what I observed there, because we got to see the product and we got to hear the reflections. I got to see how it was done. And it really struck me because in addition to my work at Wire Media, I also work at Vox Media. And I work on podcasts there. I'm an editor. And I happen to be working right now on a narrative podcast about communities across the United States experiencing disaster. So I basically am in the same project that you all were doing. Like literally, I was on Slack as I was like up the escalator, finalizing notes on an episode that, we're about to lock. And then I walk into a room and you all are brainstorming how it might feel to be asked about an experience of disaster, what emotions might one have. I mean, it's very much, Claudia, the question that you asked. They were interrogating those questions before they even, made the step to turn to one another and start forming questions. And it's, as somebody who I work in journalism every day, and it's not the way things are typically done, just put it like that. And so, the approach that that Sean has developed is really centering empathy as what interviews are all about, a kind of solidarity journalism, and even something just to make it specific, as concrete as pre-interviews, right? So pre-interviews are things that for journalists in the room, we all know what pre-interviews are for, right? They helped us to optimize our own process so we can be more efficient in getting the tape that we need, right? And the way that you all were doing pre-interviews was the opposite of that. And it comes back to Mark's talk about power. It was about power sharing. It was about how do we open up this process so that every step along the way, there's a collaborative decision-making process between the interviewer and the storyteller about how we're going to move through this process together. So that, I started to think about some of the echoes in our talks on the research side about extraction and the extractive practices that we're up against. And Claudia, you talked about this in your work, and how journalism itself can be an extractive practice, can be a plundering of communities and of stories and of vulnerabilities. And so what we were able to witness, I think, is what it looks like when we take a sort of a very different approach to what the work of journalism can be. So then, of course, our task as educators is to think about how we can translate that into media education. So I come back to social imagination and wide awakeness as one of the things that really was a through line for me across our time. And I want to end with something that really shook me awake. And Claudia, I'm looking at you because I just, this is just one example of just a moment in one of the talks where you mentioned that there was a group of Indigenous youth radio producers who were living in a place where for a period of time they didn't have access to the radio. They couldn't actually power the radio. And you said in just like a quick line, well, you don't need the radio to make radio. And that was like, blew my mind, right? And it made me think about Marshall McLuhan and the medium. And it made me think about my own unexamined assumptions about what it means to make radio, and my overinvestment in audience, that it always has to reach audience, that it has to, hit impact only in that way. And you helped me to think about how the media is a modality for how we move through the world, how we think our way through our day, and how we know what our role can be as we interact with others in our communities. So that's just one example of just a kind of a mind-opening insight that surfaced for me out of this conference. And it takes me back to how we started when Deborah Sparrow offered her imperative, I would say, to find the good stories. And so I look forward to that good work continuing.
That was amazing. I don't know if it's like trying to follow up The Who or Led Zeppelin. Um, I don't want this to be about me personally at all, but I want to just share a little bit of a story, and then I want to get into the conference. So I was really amazed. I was so glad to see Mark today talk about punk rock, because that's how I got started. And the way I got into media literacy was being a punk kid in LA and looking around and seeing everything, pardon the French, of the nomenclature of the movement, but it was all fucked up and we had to respond to it in some way. And so we made our own media, and that made me, I guess, a media literate person, because I then went in to become a journalist out of that experience without any formal training. I mean, I went on to college and studied peace and conflict studies, but that experience in the punk movement led me to journalism. And I was a journalist for, I don't know, 10, 12 years. I see that seems to be a theme, a lot of ex-journalists getting into education. And when I turned 33, some people, I lived in Santa Fe at the time, and it's kind of a new agey place, and some people said, "Oh, it's your Jesus year." I'm like, what is that supposed to mean? And it's like, well, it's the year that he died. It's like, so what is that? What's going to happen to me? And the weird thing is that my immune system collapsed. And like many people now, I had this sort of undiagnosable environmental response to something, and my immune system was no longer functioning properly, and I got quite sick, and I couldn't work as a journalist anymore. So I went to Spain. I did the Camino to Santiago de Compostela. I don't know if anyone's heard of this. I did this pilgrimage, and I just needed it, and I was well enough to do this. So it took about 2 months. I walked from France all the way across Spain. And I didn't know what was going to happen. I got on the road, and there's a certain point where you're walking the road, and then you realize the road is walking you. And I had this epiphany that all my grandparents were educators. And I'd never thought in my life that I would be a teacher. It never occurred to me that this is something I should do. But it kind of, hit me like thunder or lightning, I guess, is what hits you. And on the middle of the plains of Castilla, there's nothing to see. It's completely flat. They say the landscape is in the sky, which means there's nothing to see. So you're bored out of your minds, and you're just kind of working through this. It's like a meditation. And I was like, okay, I got to teach. And so I felt like that's the solution. I'm going to go back to Santa Fe and I'm going to teach. And I got back to Santa Fe, and I was looking at like, okay, to teach, what do you have to do? Well, you have to be certified. So I went to the bookstore and looked at the books for the test. And I'm reading the books of these tests. I'm like, oh my God, I can't fucking do this. I'm a punk rocker. I can't, there's no way they're going to certify me. I can't, there's just no way. I'm not going to take a test. That's not going to wait. I kind of threw up my arms, and I almost quit. But there was this youth center in Santa Fe called Warehouse 21. And it's, your discussion of youth sites is precisely that kind of a place. And that was where media literacy was happening. And I just went to them and I said, look, I don't know what I can do here, but I used to make zines when I was a teenager, and maybe we can make zines with the other teenagers here, and I volunteer. So I went there, and there was a woman working there who sort of assisted me, and every week we made a newspaper. It was a kind of a fun project. And she said, hey, you know what? I work at the Santa Fe Indian boarding school, and I'm going to quit, but I'm going to recommend that you take the job. And so they called me. I went in, I met with them, and they hired me. So, oh my God, I'm a teacher and I'm working in a school, and I did have to take that bloody test. And it was the gifted and talented program. And this led to a journey like of 3-4 years. And I'm sort of telling this story just to explain how I got into the ecological perspective in media literacy. Because I was really turned on by media literacy. This was about this is around 2000, and it was just kind of exploding. And there was the New Mexico Media Literacy Project, and I was doing every training they could do. I was just I was just drinking it in. I loved it. But when I started working at the Santa Fe Indian boarding school, there was some kind of disconnection between sort of like the framework that I was learning from the formal media or from the media literacy people, and what I was experiencing on the reservation, and doing the projects that we were going out into the field and working in the forest, and the elders saying, okay, because I was sort of in charge of the youth media project aspects of it, working with the students, teenagers, going to their sacred, you know, so very privileged. It was amazing that they were letting me go there because it's not normally, you know, a white guy can't go there. And I was in these places and they're like, well, you can't point the camera there. I'm like, I don't want to, I'm not going to say why, but they seem to know that the certain things are, you should not film, and you don't even ask why, just don't do it out of respect. So I I kept thinking about these experiences I was having, and it was like I was being transformed. I was being changed by this experience. And the at the time, the media literacy movement was in this anti-tobacco phase. And so they were going to these native kids and saying, okay, your tobacco is bad. And like the kids had these pouches with their sacred tobacco that they did every morning prayers to 4 directions. And, you know, the media literacy folks are going to them and saying tobacco is bad. And I was like, okay, we have a problem here. And there's a disconnection between the sort of the, I don't know how else to say this, the worldview, the cosmology, or the epistemology of sort of the academic media literacy world and what was going on on the reservation. So that led me on a journey to graduate school and then eventually getting my PhD. And I have to admit that through this whole process, I felt so lonely because no one else was seeing what I was seeing. And I felt like I was this antenna, you know, I was zeroing on this thing, but no one else was seeing it. And I mentioned earlier this anecdote of like the first time I presented on eco-media literacy was at the MES conference in London, and only 2 people came to my session. And for the first 5-6 years, I just kept going out there, and it was always 2-3 people. And now I'm like looking around, and we're centering this, and I'm like, what is going on? What happened? And I'm like so honored and amazed and shocked in a good way. And I just want to say that I don't want, this is not about me. I hope that when I put out these ideas in the book that I wrote, that's just a way to start something. And I would love to step aside and let everyone just take over. Save me a lot of stress. So what I want to say is I want to tip my hat to the organizers of this conference for doing this, because this is a radical and risky thing that they did. And I'm afraid if I don't want to start naming names because I'll forget someone and then I'll get in trouble. But you know who you are, and thank you so much for for what you've done here. And so I was feeling a lot of pressure, like when they said to do the plenary at the end, like, and I was like, well, what am I going to do? What am I going to say? And I was like really kind of nervous. And then yesterday, Paolo played this wonderful game with us, the medium that he created, and it really gave me an idea to crowdsource the plenary with you. So I don't have to do it. It's really, now you all are going to do it. So this is what we're going to do. Let's see. Do you have the clicker? You gave it to me, and then it's in my book. Oh, there we go. I don't know if this is, first of all, does this laser work? I want to make sure it's, yeah, okay. Okay, slide. Okay. All right, there's the game. So this is a little bit of a risk too, because this idea of educologies is, see, when we play the game, we're already talking about established media like books, printing press, and so forth, currency, but media educologies doesn't really exist. So it's kind of, we have to use our imaginations a little bit and try to do this exercise of something that's emerging, something's new. So in a way, I would encourage everyone to think aspirationally, like aspirationally, what should media educologies can be. And I really hope that the youth participants can also contribute, because I want to hear, or we all want to hear, what will you aspire for this new educational model that we're sort of inventing on the fly collectively, and hear from you, because you are the experts. So a lot of you were here yesterday playing this game. And I've asked Paulo to help out in case I flub this, because he's the expert. But I also like to teach with the tetrad, and this is comes from McLuhan, and the McLuhan Foundation has a very important presence here today, so I'd like to acknowledge their support for this conference. The tetrad is this concept that McLuhan developed, in which you could basically, it's a heuristic in order for us to think about any kind of new or emergent media that has this consistent pattern where, if you can see on the upper left, it's going to enhance and improve something, and then also retrieve something that was perhaps lost, that brings something back. But when you create something new, it obsolesces something else. And if you, and this is where I need the help, Paulo, with the reversal, because that's always the most complicated thing to explain. If you push something new to the extreme, it flips into its, how would you say it? Yeah, unintended consequences. So what I thought we could do is take this idea of media educologies and sort of generate amongst all of us what we think it enhances, even though we don't quite know what it is, but we have to imagine what it is based on what we're experiencing. What is it retrieving? What is it obsolescing? And also maybe we can hear from the youth what needs to be obsolesced. But maybe what to be cautious about, like what should we be careful about as we move forward so that we don't create unintended consequences. So this is interactive. The idea is to crowdsource the plenary. Okay, so I'm done with my job. Thank you very much. See you later. But maybe we can do what as educators we always do, is this parent share. Oh God, we have to talk to each other. Maybe if you could take about 3 or 4 minutes and talk with each other and go through the tetrad and think about what you've experienced with the media educologies and what you think is emerging and what it improves. What are we retrieving? What are we obsolescing? And then what are the things that we should be careful about? So go ahead and talk with each other for a couple minutes. Yeah,
Very clever.
save my ass.
Yeah.
This way everyone wins.
Yeah.
Yesterday I lost, so I was not happy about that.
Totally. What do you think it is?
In like the negative
Yeah.
possibility is not having any definition. I was, because I worked on it, and I have a slide where I sort of worked it out a little bit. Lacking definition, lacking sort of like, I didn't use the word measurable, but like, how do you know like you're doing something? What do you think?
Well, I'm trying to think about if it's pushed to the extreme, what is the unanticipated outcome? So it's more like, how does it backfire? I'm trying to
Yeah,
think of,
oh,
how
like,
does
yeah,
it
I thought about
backfire?
that too, like critical race theory, like the way
Yeah.
or being woke. Well, yeah, I mean, that's when I say with lacking definition, not being able to fit into the system, and so
Yeah.
the system rejects it.
Okay. So just
Yeah.
becoming like just it not hitting, like it's
Yeah.
just never gonna sort of be acceptable. The impact of it. Yeah.
And maybe even being too radical.
And can you define the term for me? Media educology?
No, I can't,
Yeah.
because I think people have different ideas about it. I think though it's centering the concept of ecology in education, but that concept could mean literally the idea of ecology and climate, but also media is an ecology,
Right. Right.
education is an ecology.
Right.
That's the way I think about
Yeah.
it. They came up with the term, so
Yeah.
we should ask them.
And
Good.
what do you think are retreats, like a period when there was more of an appreciation for like the relationship between like
Yeah, I
self
think it
and
retreats the
nature
commons,
Yeah.
and collective responsibility,
Yeah.
and, care, maybe.
Mhm. Like harmony, the idea of like living in harmony. What does it mean to live in harmony with the environment?
Yeah.
One another,
Mhm.
like not
Yeah.
that ever existed. but
Yeah.
There used to be, it is like a little bit of a like I don't know, is it kind of a 1970, like, is there sort of a like?
Yeah, I mean,
influence,
it's,
sort of like,
it can be problematic, but on the other hand, humans were fairly sustainable for hundreds of thousands of years,
yeah,
so
yeah,
it's really only the past. I mean, there have been civilizations throughout that have sort of collapsed, but it's really the last 200 years that we kind of lost our bearings.
I mean, it's also like the flippiness is also the thing that I was referencing, which is the idea that like all of these terms that used to be, um, we could use as shorthand for like the idea of centering equity
Mhm.
and expression are being like commandeered and appropriated by the far right. So
Yeah, I know, I know,
like,
identity
that,
politics and all that.
yeah. So is that like, is there a risk
Oh.
of that somehow?
Yeah, I didn't even,
You know,
I could have gone into eco-fascism,
yeah,
and I almost did, but I just like, I'm
Yeah.
gonna,
yeah, but maybe that's part of
Yeah,
the
yeah.
flip. I want
Yeah.
to flip it too. Yeah.
Okay, I hate to interrupt and stop because it's so amazing to hear the hum of your voices. And this is an ongoing project. Of course, we're not going to solve everything in the next 5 minutes, but does anyone want to share about like, I mean, Lissa was asking me, what is media educology, and I said, well, I don't actually know because the conference organizers came up with it, but but I thought, okay, it centers ecology in the sort of environmental sense, but also media as an ecology, but also education as an ecology. So maybe those sort of three. Is that okay? All right, good. We're on the same page. So. In terms of your own discussions, does anyone want to share what it enhances this approach? Yeah. So it enhances interdisciplinarity and diversity. Would that be okay? Someone else? Yes.
Enhances a regard for multiple forms of communication in a way that tries to defer from canonical print literacies to allow other kinds of forms of connection and engagement to happen. And I think we've heard that during the book.
So diversity.
Well, it's more about communicate. It's actually about multimodality.
Multimodality and in communicative diversity as well. Yes. Okay. Someone else? Yes. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I just want to add in one thing. It's up something that Amy and Wendy practice with it. It also is improving our way of thinking about how signal noise. Sometimes noise is a signal, and sometimes signal is actually a kind of noise.
Mm-hmm.
And that regard for money and the binaries is something that has come through in medical talks about, for instance, affecting
Mm-hmm.
linear forms of understanding.
Yeah, very good. Okay, anyone else before we go on to the next one? Any other comments? Okay, what does it retrieve? Yeah. Cybernetics. Mm-hmm. Okay, very good. Someone else? Oh, yeah. No, okay, diverse epistemologies, okay. Mhm. Okay, say that again. Critical geographies, critical or political ecology, political economy, sorry. Mhm. Okay, okay, good. Anyone else? Does this retrieve anything? What's that? Holism, yeah, very good. Yeah, yeah, very good. Holism. Hmm. Okay, what about, oh yeah, I know. So my hands are full. That's a good point. Someone take notes quick. Yeah, a good idea. Yeah. Well, when I put up my slide, maybe that can help trigger some memories we can add to that. But yeah, that's good. Yeah. So let's take notes. Um, what is it obsolesce? What do we want? And this is also kind of aspirational. Yes. So enhances collaboration, but then hierarchy. Okay. What do the members of our youth delegation want to see obsolesced? What do you want to see? So you're talking about the co-production of knowledge, as opposed to like there's a hierarchical top-down knowledge that you're consuming as a like sort of almost like the old way we used to think about media, but you're co-producing the knowledge, you're co-producing the education. Yes. Okay. Yes. So could I say denial? The obsolescence of denial. Yeah. Okay. Yes. What say that again? Yes. Obsolescence, the anthropocentric worldview. 100%. Anyone else? Okay, this is the hard part, the reverses, the flips. Like what are the unintended or bad side effects that could happen from this kind of reimagining of education? What's that? Oh, yeah. It becomes instrumental. Yeah, toolified. That's a good word. I like that. What else? Yeah. Oh yeah, it puts too much burden on the people doing the work. Yeah, that's a big, that's heavy. Claudia, did you? Yeah, yeah, to become yeah, like something fixed and yeah. Say that again? Too self-referential. Yeah. So they could become a candidate, but also I was thinking, because I kind of try to work through it earlier today. It could also be too amorphous. That could be like another side effect that it doesn't, that there's no definition and that it wouldn't make sense and it can't be absorbed. Yeah. Mm. Kind of like when green technology is still extractive. Yeah, like there's like the intention of having clean energy and clean tech, but it's still extractive. And then we were talking amongst ourselves and thought like one possible reversal of flip would be eco-fascism, which I was going to say something earlier about it, but I just didn't want to go in that direction. But that's something we have to be very cautious of. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, it's a greenwashing basically. And also, I think what you said, and this has come up quite a bit in the past few days, you know, for during this push for social justice and these creations of these equity and inclusion initiatives end up just being words and not action. You know, they could just be superficial. Okay, we have to close. Yes, really quickly. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, good point. So I guess I'm told we have to shut down. I have two really quick slides. Yeah. So yeah. Um, we can share the slides, you know, through the network. These are just ideas I came up at 5 in the morning today. And you know, but you can see like a lot of what you all brought up are similar to, I mean, there's a lot of overlap here. So yeah, take a picture. Um, and I think we'll have to have another conference to go over it in more detail. Uh, I'll just close with this, two quick slides. Just, I always have to ground myself, just remembering where we are and just as a reminder of why we're doing this. And this is why we have to we have to make changes. And I love what Evelyn Acham says, you know, the climate is changing, so should the curriculum. And I think we'll leave it at there. Thank you.
Antonio and Lissa, thank you so much. I'm sorry, but Gray and I were just flagged until they have another event in here tomorrow, and we were supposed to be out at 7 apparently, which was not what I understood. But at any rate, so thank you so much for summing and bringing us together and allowing us to chat together as well. As Key said, it felt for a moment like school, and then it didn't, which was really great. To bring us to a close, I want to welcome up somebody who I don't think has had as much stage presence as I imagined that he might. But I want you to know that amongst the people to thank for our time together, who has dedicated intense time and vision and organizing and resources to this, Julian McDougall has been first and top of the list. And we haven't really had a proper chance to thank Julian for his leadership and his work this year, but in multiple years on the Media Education Summit. And so in welcoming Julian to the stage, I also want to thank him for his vision and leadership around this. Julian?
Thanks very much. I'm just not stand with that light blinding me. Um, I'll be brief, I promise, because it's a bit late. Thank you for the thanks, and thank you everyone for being here. So I'm going to thank some people as well. The hour is late. We've been working across many time zones and for years actually on this, and in the moment, some of us are still adjusting from traveling. So the times are out of joint, I guess, literally, and also with regard to the conference theme, perhaps. And by the way, I think the roots of media literacy go way back past punk. It's skiffle music, I think, isn't it? If you really know your music. Anyway, sincere thanks to you, to everybody who's been involved in MES. It's a team effort. There's no hierarchy. I'm bound to miss somebody, but I've got a list, so I can hopefully not do. So Stephen and Gray, thank you so much for everything. Layla, thank you so much. Stuart, of course. And everything you said, yeah, I would say back to you, saying it'd be a very mutual kind of embarrassing love-in between the two. Carolyn and David from the McLuhan Foundation, thank you so much. From our side of the pond, as they say, well, Europe at least for all of us, Isabella, Karen and Laura, who can't be with us today, all of us from the UK. The YMES team and the Climate Disaster Project. Nearly there. All the panel chairs. The keynote speakers for the inspiring talks, but also genuinely, sincerely for engaging with us for the whole of the conference. It doesn't always happen at conferences, but it's been great how you've engaged with us throughout and challenged us, but from a place of respect and support for our collective endeavour. So thanks to Claudia and the other keynotes who've stayed with us. This is the last bit of clapping you have to do. Thanks to all the delegates, because I feel like I've had email exchanges with virtually every delegate at some point about this event, and that's because we made it productively really complicated. Came out of COVID and reflected on the fact that we'd been able to connect with people from all over the world during COVID, and then suddenly it didn't seem okay to say, well, we're going to Vancouver, so sorry if you can't be with us, but we're back in the real world. So we wanted to have a virtual strand, but it's hard to do that while you have a conference that needs to be viable. So we tried to integrate it without making it quite hybrid. We had a subsidized ticket rate for people from the global South, Middle East and North Africa, which of course sometimes is more complicated and problematic than you at first might think. So lots of email exchanges with individual delegates trying to work out exactly what category people fit into and how we could connect with them. So thank you to all of you, the delegates, both in the room and online, for your patience while we grappled with our good intentions. So I promise, because we've got to go. As we close MES23, reflect on this time together in Vancouver and online, I think we can productively think about how our conference theme, in tandem with how our hosts have required us to try to understand differently what we mean by being present in this city and what it is to be hosted, and what we mean when we think about a decolonial state, have converged together productively. The critical and conflicted intersection between the legacy of McLuhan, as we've returned to at the conclusion, and the panels and keynotes urging us to look at media education through the lens of new epistemologies from the South and from struggle, have been a purposefully awkward context, I think, for our days here at MES. So I'm not sure that media education and media literacy are really still about the same things as they've always been: text, context, frame, medium, message. I don't think that's quite where we've been to these last few days, especially when one of our YMES participants earlier on commented to the planning committee on the lack of diversity in our community as represented here in person. There's clearly lots of work to do. And here is Wendy Hu-Kong Chun, our first keynote, all the way back on Thursday, seems a long time ago now, writing after McLuhan. She writes about taking McLuhan to the literal curb, to weave and spin outside the Eurocentric mirror, to follow wires and misfiles, to punch through indices and stand on platforms, to shelter by refusing and by fabricating, because after is not less, rather to come after is to change what remains in store for the future. So holding that thought, our intention is to hold the next MES in the Global South. There seems no other justifiable objective at this point. Thanks for being here with us in person or online. It's been a privilege to be with you all to hear about your work, which is very important work. Safe travels, and I hope we all meet again. Thank you.